Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. This is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and today we're going to talk about my thoughts on the latest Dune adaptation, 2021 movie by Denis Villeneuve. The first part of a duology, it is a rough adaptation of the first half of the iconic novel by Frank Herbert that has inspired countless writers and franchises over the years. The movie has been out for well over 3 years now, so consider this the first and only spoiler warning in case you haven't seen it yet. For myself, as someone who has been invested with the Duneverse for almost 23 years now, it is a challenge to talk about a huge adaptation like Dune because there's just so much that is going to end up on the editing floor and so much that would never have made it into the script in the first place. David Lynch's 1984 adaptation suffered from this in spades and even added brand new material that appeared incongruent at times with the source material. Now, Villeneuve's adaptation certainly seems to have taken some lessons of its predecessor to heart, and to the eyes of someone who hasn't read the novel in almost a decade, it appears to hew quite closely to the source material. It certainly includes far more scenes, crucial scenes at that, which were missing from the original adaptation, such as Duncan Idaho's infamous last stand in defense of Paul and Lady Jessica, the entire extended sequence with the Fremen fighting a Sardaukar, and Liet Kynes' aid to Paul and Jessica is a key part of the overall narrative, and I'm really glad that these scenes were included. Certainly, Dune is a massive tome packed full of characters and situations which cannot be faithfully recreated for a cinematic experience. But director Villeneuve makes a strong effort, especially since the experience is divided over two full length movies rather than being condensed into a single one. At the same time, however, it also changes things quite a bit. And I confess that I was quite confused as to the reasons. And one such prominent example is how the sequence of Dr. Yue's betrayal of the Atreides is shortened in the movie and is treated almost as an afterthought, whereas the Lynch adaptation gave it more consideration, gave it more room, and certainly gave us a bit of a setup as to how and what was going to happen. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter, given that most of the first movie is all about the Atreides losing their fiefs and losing their followers in one swift act of betrayal and revenge that leaves pretty much most of our original cast dead. However, Yue was a catalyst to that fall, and for someone who has read the book, it's quite possible that without him, the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar would not have been able to even surprise the Atreides as they did. Now, the initial scenes with Yue mark him out as a rather important character, but in the end, he is just one among many who fall to the Harkonnen scheming. The same also applies to the character of Pyra de Vries, who was another afterthought here, despite being a fairly key character from the book and one of the main architects of the Atreides' fall. He barely gets any screen time, and his near exclusion takes away from the whole villainy of the Harkonnens because the movie is focused very much on just Paul and Jessica and Leto and all their allies, rather than all the scheming and backstabbing that is going on behind the scenes with the Harkonnens and with the Padishah Emperor himself. There are so many dominoes that have to fall for Paul to begin his journey as the prophesied Messiah of the Fremen people, the one who will lead them to freedom and usher in the rebirth of Arrakis as a paradise. And so picking and choosing which dominoes to depict could not have been easy for the director, even with the time allotted to him. But I do think that he makes a great effort. And, in the end, this is the case for all adaptations, like I said. Some things are going to end up being in the movie, some things are going to be cut, and it's a tough decision all around, especially for someone who has clearly been so dedicated to making this adaptation happen and who has put a lot of love and care, as we can see from the movie. On the acting front, the movie is certainly a mixed bag. It doesn't help that we've had a movie adaptation before, as well as a television adaptation and a two-part miniseries that also included two of the direct sequels written by Frank Herbert. So comparing and contrasting the adaptations is a given, and in the grand scheme of things, as far as I'm concerned, this is clearly the winner over whether we're talking about the miniseries or we're talking about the 1984 movie, because this one just has so much room to grow. And also, as I've said, the acting front, I felt that the lead actor, Timothy Chalamet, as Paul, he lacked a certain presence and he lacked the charisma that we could see from Kyle MacLachlan from the 1984 movie, and he's too reserved to the point of being nearly non-expressive. He does have certain scenes, such as the fight scene with Gurney Halleck earlier in the movie, and his reunion with Duncan Idaho as well. But overall, I felt that he really lacked a certain chemistry with most of his co-stars. Whether we're talking about his father, his mother, or any of the other characters that we get to see on the screen. His is a performance at odds with his other work, such as playing the titular character of 2023's Wonka. He has the range, but in this movie, it just kind of felt like he was phoning it in. And for a story that has its plot revolved so much around him and his relationships to the people around him, this was a big letdown. And I have to say that I was very disappointed with his portrayal. On the other hand, Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho is one for the ages in stark contrast, and Oscar Isaac's Leto Atreides is a match for Jurgen Prochnow from the '84 adaptation. They both brought a certain vitality to their respective roles, and I lament the fact that we won't be seeing them again, except perhaps from Momoa, if you know, you know. And I also certainly felt that this was a really good role for Oscar Isaac, especially. He has been doing in a lot of work in recent years with different adaptations, and this is one where he certainly got to flex some of his acting muscles. Although I felt that with the story as it was, there wasn't enough room for him to really display how good of an actor he is. Perhaps if someday we can get a prequel movie of sorts with House Atreides, there's certainly a lot of material for that. Maybe he can come back and he can deliver on that. Now, Patrick Stewart was quite phenomenal in the Lynch adaptation, and Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck compares quite well, although I felt that in some of his scenes, he struggled a little bit. Gurney is a poet and a singer when he's not a warrior, and the role, as in the first movie, seemed to ill-fit Brolin, who had to stand against a Shakespearean actor like Stewart. But all the same, I am excited to see more of him in the next installment, which is going to be very soon, where he will be able to hold his own quite well, I feel, since he will have much more room to maneuver as an actor. There's certainly a lot of meat to his performance that we can expect to see, and he certainly has the chops for it. Hopefully, scenes make it through, because Gurney Halleck is an amazing character with a very tragic past, and I'd really like to see more of him in Dune Part 2. Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica just shined in every scene she was in. She has the lion's share of the narrative to move along, other than Chalamet Paul, and I think she did a pretty damn good job of it. I haven't seen much of her beyond the Mission Impossible movies, but she was definitely a standout for this one. And much as with Brolin's Halleck, I'm very excited to see her in the next movie as she takes on a greater role not just in Paul's life, but also within the narrative. Because you have to remember, the story of Dune, the opening trilogy by Frank Herbert, it's not just about Paul, although the narrative is very much centered on him. It's also about Lady Jessica and her own journey as a mother and as a Bene Gesserit. Now, the same also goes for Zendaya's Chani. She only had a teaser of her role in the first movie, and to be frank, the next movie as well may not do her character justice, but nevertheless, Zendaya's performance captures the minutiae of Chani's portrayal quite well. There are very few actors who can elevate any role they perform, and Zendaya is one such actor, so hopefully she gets a good turnout in Dune Part 2. Other standouts I'd mention are Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen and Javier Bardem as Stilgar. They both took to their roles quite well. Although I do want to mention that this movie understates the Baron quite a bit. Kenneth McMillan had a delicious sort of villainy in camp to his performance in the Lynch adaptation, and the production really gave him room to grow as a character. And it seems that, as much as with other aspects of the movie, this one, Skarsgård had to make do with a visually muted setting, which fits the story of the Atreides quite a bit, but with the Harkonnen scenes, not so much. Further, Dave Bautista's Glossu Raban was a blink and you miss it kind of performance. He doesn't really get any good scenes in, and we certainly don't see him go apocalyptic much. He is called Beast Raban for a reason, and at the risk of repeating myself yet again, I hope the sequel movie does Batista and Raban justice. Visually, Dune Part 1 is a feast. We have grand scenes of plenty, especially in the second half when the Atreides fight the Harkonnens in a pitched battle, and many of the cinematography choices help elevate this movie beyond its predecessors. It is much like how there's a huge technological jump between the Star Wars prequel movies and the original trilogy. Technology is at a point where we no longer have to satisfy ourselves with the 1984 adaptation's depiction of force wheels or the incandescent blue eyes of the Fremen or just the very blocky nature of the special effects. The ships, as well in Villeneuve's Dune, are fantastic, and I especially loved how they depicted the iconic ornithopters from the novel, which was just amazing. They have a great aesthetic to them and really fit the overall feel of the setting itself. Now, if there's any one particular great crime in the movie, it's that there's an abrupt ending to the story. It was inevitable given that the book was split into two movies, a wise decision to be sure, and the cutoff is expected, but it still rankles quite a bit. I got so lost with the characters and story that I was almost flabbergasted when it ended. Thankfully, I'm coming to the movie rather late, and we'll have the sequel in a few short weeks, so the wait isn't long. But then, once it does release, we can absolutely go to town. The Lynch adaptation is one of my favorite all-time classics, so to speak, and I watch it yearly as part of a small slate of movies that I consider to be classic, amazing movies worthy of a yearly rewatch. And I cannot wait to add this adaptation to that list with more than double the screen time of its predecessor to boot. A fuller and more rewarding experience, so to speak. In the end, while I do have some gripes with this movie, I also cannot deny that it is a very good adaptation. As I said before, it hews quite closely to the book itself, and it gives us some amazing moments and performances. Despite some of its flaws, I have no doubt that in time it will become a classic itself, and I certainly wish that Villeneuve and his crew get to make the sequels for Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, finishing out Paul's story in full and passing on the baton to another team perhaps to continue the adventures of this amazing franchise. Cheers, guys. That's all for me today. See y'all later. Bye.